In this section, we will be dealing with ecology. Now, in ecology, we're concerned with ecological systems or ecosystems. We're going to be looking at recycling natural resources. And then towards the end, we will be looking at the challenges to the ecosystem per se. First of all, an ecosystem consists of biotic factors and abiotic factors. In reality, an ecosystem can be as small as a leaf on a tree or as large as the earth itself. Now, with biotic factors, of course, we're looking at populations and communities, and abiotic factors, we're looking all at resources and environmental conditions that impact an ecosystem. Now, it's important to understand that in every ecosystem, we have to conserve the natural resources. So when we deal with abiotic factors, we're looking at carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water, and oxygen. All of these are important resources that have to be recycled. First of all, let's look at the carbon cycle. All of us know by now that carbon is an important and a vital part of all living organisms. Carbon dioxide is produced through the process of respiration, and carbon dioxide is vital to the process of photosynthesis. While this cycle looks complex, we have to look at it simplistically in the sense that photosynthesis brings in the carbon dioxide, converts it to carbohydrates. The plants, of course, carry out respiration as well, and this respiration produces carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Animals, of course, as you can see in 2, will eat plants, and as they decay, their carbon, of course, will be recycled to the process of decay and also to the process of fossil formation, fossil fuel formation, which, of course, gets released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So this is a fairly easy cycling system to understand. So look at it carefully and understand the relationships between photosynthesis, respiration, decay, organisms, and fossil fuels. Now, when we look at nitrogen, that's a very interesting element that's present in the atmosphere. Now, where is nitrogen used? Of course, the guess would be proteins. Proteins utilize nitrogen. Now, we cannot utilize nitrogen directly from the atmosphere. It is plentiful, but an organism, whether you're a plant or an animal, cannot use that nitrogen directly. Instead, as you can see, the complex cycle of nitrogen utilization requires the intermediate action of bacteria. Bacteria will bring in nitrogen from the atmosphere, fix it to form ammonia and various nitrates, and it is the ammonia and the various nitrates that can be assimilated, as you can see, into plants. Animals now will utilize these plants, convert the nitrogen to their pool of amino acids, and of course, when animals die, their waste products again will become recycled and so on. So this is an important process to understand, that nitrogen fixation is important in that the nitrogen now becomes available both for plants and animals. So now we'll look at water. Obviously, we're all concerned with the availability of fresh water. But when we look at the water in our ecosystem, the water, for the most part, is present in seawater. So 97% of all water is present in the ocean. Only 2.5% is fresh water, and most of that is present in ice caps and glaciers. The available water is less than 1% that's present in groundwater, rivers, lakes, and so on. The water cycle we're all familiar with consists of evaporation of water from the oceans and eventually precipitation, which lands the water on land. But as you can see, most of the water from the evaporation actually ends up back into the oceans. Now, when we look at groundwater, the groundwater actually goes into stored areas called aquifers that we can access fresh water. In addition, the groundwater will end up in streams, lakes, and so on. And this is basically our source of available water. When we look at the human impact on natural resources, we have to understand that when we look at carbon dioxide concentration, humans only contribute about 24% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The vast majority is produced through the normal process of respiration, both by plants and animals, as you can see to your left. When it comes to nitrogen, humans contribute greatly to the nitrogen fixation process, as you can see. 58% is actually contributed and made available to plants through human ingenuity. When it comes to the accessibility of water, we actually use about 50+%, and we still have significant amount available for our use. Of course, they may be present in places that are difficult to get to. Now that we understand the basic ecosystem, let's look at how populations exist within an ecosystem. And populations exist in an ecosystem in a level that we refer to as food chains or food webs. Now, food chains and food webs can be quite complex. To start with, we have producers, and of course producers you might think of being plants, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and then towards the bottom, if you might say, we have detritivores. These are basically decomposers, fungi, bacteria, and so on. It's important that we understand how this process works with respect to energy flow. Energy flows through a food chain. Now, if we look to your left, obviously our source of energy is the sun. The energy from the sun is captured by producers through the process, of course, of photosynthesis. The primary consumer eats the producer and captures part of that energy. The secondary consumer eats the primary consumer and gets some of that energy, and so on, and so on, and so on. We go to tertiary consumers and quaternary consumers, and so on. But energy is flowing from left to right, and we often look at it with respect to trophic level. The producer is trophic level 1. The primary consumer, trophic level 2. The secondary consumer, trophic level 3, and on we go through the process. If we look at a food web, it can be quite complex. We have multiple trophic levels. And here we're looking at an aquatic food web, and we see where our producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers are, and everybody is interdependent on everybody else. For example, if we eliminate one organism, the impact can be massive with respect to the overall food chain or food web. Now we'll look at detritivores, which are an important part of any food chain or food web. Here we're looking at a log that obviously is dead, but it is a source of food for a variety of critters. Now, as you can see, the longhorn beetle has found its niche. To your left, as you move, you can see the bark beetle comes in, the carpenter beetle comes in, the termite beetle comes in, and finally fungi comes in and fully decomposes and allows the nutrients to recycle back into the system. Now, this is basically resource partitioning in the sense that one organism produces the conditions for the next organism, which produces the conditions for the next organism to survive, and so on. Getting back to this energy flow within a system. For the most part, the capture of energy by plants is pretty much inefficient. A very small amount of total energy is captured as carbohydrates because In the process of this energy metabolism, much of the energy is lost in heat, much of the energy is used for cellular respiration, but very little actually is captured in the plant itself as a carbohydrate source. When, again, looking at this energy transfer, when we look at the trophic levels, which here represents the primary consumer being the first trophic level, by the time that energy is transferred to the primary consumer, 90% of it is lost. And by the time it's transferred to the secondary consumer, 90% more is lost, so that as you keep moving up the food chain and up the trophic level, we see that it's a fairly inefficient process. The bottom line is, it is more efficient in an ecosystem to going to the primary producer as a food source rather than going to the primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. So the bottom line is energy transfer in an ecosystem is not very efficient. And the closer you are to the producer, the more efficient you are with respect to the energy utilization. I said the hip to the hip, hop, you don't stop the